No, I'm not gonna. You don't own me.
The chapel was silent, not the kind of silence born from emptiness, but one carved out of awe, the kind that falls when legends depart and time itself seems to bow. A faint jazz melody played somewhere in the distance, almost like a memory refusing to fade. Rows of white chrysanthemums stood against soft amber light. Every petal seemed to breathe the same quiet sadness that hung in the air. And then Jack Nicholson rose. 88 years old now, his once mischievous grin replaced by something fragile, almost human. He walked slowly toward the podium, silver hair catching the candlelight. When he stopped, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He didn't need to introduce himself. He simply looked up at the framed black and white photograph, Diane Keaton. Fedora tilted, that familiar half-smile dancing between joy and irony, and whispered, "There will never be another Diane." For a moment, even grief forgot how to move. People said Jack had always been larger than life. The joker, the rebel, the Hollywood outlaw who laughed at sorrow. But that day, standing in front of Diane's portrait, he wasn't any of those things. He was just a man stripped of words, facing a love he never dared to confess until it was too late. Somewhere in the front row, Dexter and Duke, Diane's adopted children, held each other tightly. Their mother's photograph seemed to glow under the candlelight, her eyes alive with that same warmth that once lit every film she touched. Outside, Los Angeles carried on as usual, traffic, sunlight, the indifferent rhythm of life. But inside that chapel, time had stopped to mourn a woman who once made the world believe that grace could be eccentric, that beauty could come with a crooked hat and a nervous laugh. People didn't come just to say goodbye. They came because Diane Keaton had become part of who they were. The girl in Annie Hall, the wife in The Godfather, the woman who proved that age was never an apology. And now she was gone, leaving behind a silence so personal that even the city of angels seemed to weep. Jack adjusted the microphone. His hand trembled slightly. "When we worked together," he began, "I thought I understood what charm was, what light was. But Diane, she was light itself." He paused, eyes glistening. "She made the whole world fall in love, and I was one of them." A single tear traced his cheek before he smiled faintly, as though remembering something private. No cameras clicked. No one breathed. It was as if every secret ever buried in Hollywood had suddenly learned how to speak. When he finished, the chapel didn't applaud. It just felt. The air shimmered, a mix of admiration, regret, and the kind of love that never finds the courage to arrive on time. And yet, what Jack said was only the beginning. Before this day would end, others would rise to speak. Jane Fonda, still graceful in her 80s, holding a single peony, Goldie Hawn, her voice breaking through laughter and tears. Al Pacino, haunted by what he once lost. Woody Allen, trembling under memories of a young woman who had changed his art. And Keanu Reeves, carrying a quiet gratitude that bridged generations. They would all gather, lovers, co-stars, friends, disciples, orbiting the same star that had finally gone dark. Each would tell a different story. And together, those stories would reveal the real Diane Keaton, not the actress, not the icon, but the woman who had turned life itself into a performance of grace. "Stay until the end," the narrator would whisper if this were a film. and you'll see what truly remained behind the laughter, the hats, and the spotlight. Morning had barely broken over Los Angeles when the first cars began to arrive. The air carried that fragile calm only the city knows after a long night. The faint hum of traffic, the cry of a distant bird, and somewhere, the echo of jazz filtering through an open window. It was a quiet morning, just as Diane Keaton would have wanted. No red carpets, no flashing bulbs, only silence, white flowers, and people who had truly known her. The memorial was held in a modest chapel surrounded by olive trees, the kind she had once said looked like old souls whispering secrets. Inside, the scent of lilies mixed with candle wax and rain-damp earth. The golden light from the stained glass windows touched everything gently. Like memory itself, there was no official announcement, no press release, no grand procession. Diane's children, Dexter and Duke, had personally called those closest to her. Each invitation was handwritten in her old-fashioned script, black ink on cream paper, and ended with 4 words she often said: "Keep it simple, keep it true." The guest list read like a roll call of an era that defined American cinema. Woody Allen, Nancy Meyers, Jane Fonda, Goldie Hawn, Al Pacino, Keanu Reeves, Richard Gere, and, of course, Jack Nicholson. Yet despite the star power gathered under that roof, the room felt more like a family living room than a Hollywood event. Photographs lined the walls, not staged portraits, but candid moments frozen in time. Diane laughing with Pacino between takes on The Godfather. Diane walking barefoot along a Malibu beach, hat in hand. Diane holding Dexter's tiny fingers for the first time. Every image seemed to whisper a fragment of her story. The actress, the mother, the woman who never performed her life, only lived it. A piano sat in the corner, polished yet simple. When the first soft notes of "It Had to Be You" filled the air, a wave of quiet tears rippled through the crowd. It was one of her favorite songs. She once sang it on a talk show decades ago, laughing at her own nerves. That laugh still echoed here, between the stone walls and the trembling hands of those who missed her most. Woody Allen sat near the aisle, his head bowed, a small smile flickering as if replaying the first day he'd met her. Goldie Hawn clutched a white rose, her usually bright eyes now clouded with memory. Jane Fonda, elegant even in grief, pressed a hand to her heart. And Jack Nicholson, sitting 2 rows behind them, stared at the photo of Diane in her iconic Annie Hall vest and tie. The image that had once redefined what a leading lady could look like. The priest spoke softly about a life lived without compromise. But his words were soon drowned out by the collective heartbeat of nostalgia. It was as if every person in that room had shared a scene with Diane, on screen or off. Nancy Meyers, who had directed her in Something's Gotta Give, whispered to the woman beside her. She was magic on set. Even when the camera stopped rolling, she stayed luminous. The woman nodded through tears. Dexter and Duke stood side by side in the front row, composed yet fragile. They had inherited her quiet grace. In their eyes was both loss and pride, a mix that only children of icons understand. When the priest invited them to speak, Dexter's voice trembled but did not break. "My mother never wanted pity," she said. She wanted people to remember her with a smile, through the kindness she gave, through the laughter she left behind. Then she stepped back, and Duke placed a small bouquet of peonies, his mother's favorite. At the base of the casket, the candles flickered. The piano fell silent. And for a long, weightless moment, no one moved, until Jack Nicholson stood. Every head turned. The hush deepened. The mischievous grin that had once conquered every screen was gone. His face, aged, weary, and tender, carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. He clutched a folded sheet of paper, but didn't open it. Instead, he looked straight at Diane's photograph and whispered something under his breath, inaudible to all but the heavens. Then he took the podium, and that's when everything changed. What happened next would not only silence the room, but ripple far beyond, into headlines, into hearts, into the history of Hollywood itself. Because Jack Nicholson, the man who had lived a lifetime without regrets, was about to reveal the one that never stopped haunting him. When Jack Nicholson reached the podium, the air seemed to tighten. The flickering candles trembled as if the entire room inhaled at once. He adjusted the microphone, glanced briefly at the crowd, then at the framed photograph, Diane Keaton, caught in a moment of laughter. The same laughter that had once made entire film sets stop just to listen. He began quietly. "She wasn't just an actress to me," he said, voice gravelly but tender. "She was a light, a strange, gentle light that never went out." Every word felt heavier than the last, as if pulled from somewhere deep and unspoken. "I met Diane when the world still felt young," Jack continued. "It was the mid-70s, chaos, freedom, all that. She walked onto the set one afternoon and suddenly the noise disappeared. Everyone looked at her, not because she tried, but because she didn't have to." He smiled faintly, eyes shimmering behind his dark glasses. She was unapologetically herself, a little awkward, a little brilliant, completely alive. The audience remained utterly still. The only sound was the low hum of the ceiling fan and the soft crackling of candle wicks. Jack's voice grew quieter, like a confession not meant for anyone but her. "Over the years, we worked together, laughed together, fought. Sometimes. She made you feel things you didn't even know were still possible." He paused. His hands trembled slightly. "We thought we were too old to talk about love, but Diane made me believe in it again. In that trembling, foolish, beautiful thing we all spend our lives chasing." People in the crowd began wiping tears. Even those who hadn't known Diane personally could feel that this wasn't just an actor reading a eulogy. It was a man trying to mend a crack that had lived inside him for decades. Then, Jack did something unexpected. He stopped reading from his notes, folded the paper, and set it aside. "I was going to keep this part to myself," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But it doesn't feel right to leave without saying it." He took a deep breath. His next words came slowly, each one trembling. "I loved her." The sentence hung in the air, suspended between disbelief and heartbreak. "I never said it out loud, not once. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe I thought I'd have time. But life doesn't give you extra time for the things that matter." In the front row, Dexter covered her mouth with her hand, eyes glistening. Duke sat motionless, hands clasped. Around them, no one spoke. Even the cameras had stopped clicking. Jack looked down at the podium, then up again, his expression softening into a bittersweet smile. "Diane once told me," he continued, Jack, don't be afraid to love. Be afraid not to. But I was. I thought that if I said it, I might lose the friendship, lose her. So I stayed quiet. And in doing that, I lost something much bigger. He paused, wiping his eye with a shaking hand. I used to call her sometimes, just to hear her voice, he said. We'd talk about nothing, her garden, her dogs, her next project, and every time she laughed, I thought, maybe she knows. Maybe she feels it too. He looked up again, directly at her portrait. If you can hear me, Diane, thank you for teaching me that love doesn't end when words do. His final sentence was almost a whisper. There will never be another Diane Keaton. Not in this lifetime. Not in any other. The silence that followed was absolute. The kind that hums in your chest and steals your breath. Then, slowly, the music began to play. La Vie en Rose. A song Diane had once called the sound of things gone but not lost. As the melody filled the room, Jack stepped away from the podium. His eyes glistened, his shoulders heavy. He turned once more to look at her photograph, his lips moving silently, perhaps saying goodbye, perhaps saying finally. He walked back to his seat as the room dissolved into quiet sobs. Jane Fonda reached for his hand. Goldie Hawn bowed her head, and somewhere in the back, Woody Allen closed his eyes, remembering a younger Diane in a Manhattan cafe, laughing over black coffee. That moment, Jack's confession became something sacred, not for its shock, but for its truth. Because in a world that often mistakes fame for feeling, Jack Nicholson reminded everyone that even legends carry regrets. And Diane Keaton, even in death, had given him the courage to speak. When Jack Nicholson returned to his seat, no one spoke. The piano had stopped, but its echo seemed to linger in the air like the aftertaste of something too beautiful to fade. The audience sat suspended between awe and grief, an entire generation of artists realizing they had just witnessed a confession that would live forever in Hollywood memory. Then, from the front row, a soft movement. Jane Fonda stood. At 87, she still carried the poise of the woman who once ruled both protest marches and red carpets. But now her steps were slow, deliberate, her eyes shimmering beneath the chapel light. She held a single peony, Diane's favorite flower, its petals trembling as though it too could feel the weight of the moment. She reached the microphone and waited. Her voice, when it came, was low and unsteady, yet strong enough to fill the room. Diane was the woman I admired, envied, and loved, she began. She never asked anyone to like her. She simply lived as herself, and somehow, that made the world fall at her feet. A small, wistful smile crossed Jane's face. I once told her she was the symbol of freedom in Hollywood, a woman who dared to age without asking permission. Jane paused, her breath catching. She laughed and said, "I'm not brave, Jane. I'm just pretending." But we all knew she never pretended a day in her life. The crowd exhaled softly. Jane bowed her head, placed the peony beneath the portrait, and stepped back. The moment she sat down, the silence deepened again. Next came Goldie Hawn, usually radiant with laughter. Goldie's eyes were now swollen, her trademark smile nowhere to be found. She took the microphone in trembling hands. "Diane and I used to talk about the sky," she said, her voice cracking. She'd call at sunrise just to ask, "Do you think it looks beautiful today?" And I'd snap, "Diane, it's 6 in the morning." Goldie stopped, swallowing the lump in her throat. Now I'd give anything to hear that voice wake me up again. She looked toward the photo, Diane's mischievous grin immortalized in grayscale. "She made everything lighter," Goldie whispered, even when her own heart was heavy. "We didn't just lose a star. We lost a friend who taught us how to love life." As Goldie stepped down, Nancy Myers rose slowly. Her eyes were rimmed red, her face pale beneath the candlelight. The director who had once captured Diane's charm on film now struggled to find words to describe it. "I've directed many great actors," she began. But Diane was something else. She was chaos and calm in the same breath. On set, she'd laugh until everyone forgot their exhaustion. But when filming ended, she would sit alone for hours, staring at the sea. Nancy's voice softened. I once asked what she was writing in that little notebook she always carried. She said, "I'm learning to understand my own heart." She looked up, eyes shimmering. Without Diane, I might never have believed that honesty could be art. Behind her, Jane Fonda nodded through tears. Next, Patricia Arquette, younger, trembling, her emotions raw. She clutched a piece of folded paper but couldn't bring herself to open it. "When I was 19, Patricia said, "I auditioned for a role I didn't think I deserved. I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. Diane was there. She took my hand and said, 'Don't act. Just be honest.'" Patricia smiled faintly through her tears. That's who she was. Someone who believed in honesty more than perfection. She helped lost souls find themselves, and I was one of them. A hush fell once more as Patricia stepped aside. Then, the final speaker from among her closest circle, Richard Gere. He walked to the front with quiet dignity. No notes, no speech, only a white rose. "I once danced with Diane at a party," he said softly, his voice rough with memory. "She came up to me and said, 'Let's try a waltz for people who don't know how to dance.' And I, a man who can never say no to that smile, said yes." A few quiet laughs rippled through the room. "That was Diane," Richard continued. "She made you do things you didn't think you could, and when you did, you felt alive." He knelt, placed the rose gently on the casket, and whispered something no microphone caught. The chapel filled again with the sound of muffled sobs. Even the air seemed heavier, charged with love, regret, and the echo of laughter long gone. In that moment, it became clear that Diane Keaton wasn't merely being mourned. She was being remembered through every story, every trembling voice, every tear that refused to fall quietly. As the candles burned lower, the priest approached to close the ceremony. But before he could, 3 figures in the front row stood almost at once. Men from 3 different generations, bound by one woman. Woody Allen, Al Pacino, Keanu Reeves. Their presence drew a quiet gasp. Everyone knew what connected them. Not fame, not work, but Diane. What followed would turn the memorial into something far greater than a farewell. When the room finally stilled, a quiet murmur spread through the crowd. 3 men stood from the front row, each from a different generation, yet all bound by the same orbit, Diane Keaton. Woody Allen moved first. His frame seemed smaller than people remembered. his face lined by the weight of both time and memory. He took his place at the podium, eyes fixed on the black and white photograph where Diane smiled with that familiar mixture of mischief and tenderness. "She never said my lines the way I wrote them," Woody began, voice trembling, half smiling at his own words. A ripple of bittersweet laughter crossed the room. And thank God for that, because that's what saved my films. He adjusted his glasses, his hands shaking slightly. The first time I met her, it was the late 60s. She walked into an audition wearing the strangest dress I'd ever seen and talking in a rhythm no script could capture. I thought, this woman is something extraordinary. His voice softened. We fell in love, not loudly, not publicly, just two neurotic people wandering through New York, trying to understand each other. She turned my chaos into poetry. Annie Hall was our story, our love letter, and our goodbye wrapped into one film. Woody paused, drawing a deep, uneven breath. She taught me that love isn't about possession. It's about gratitude. She made me see that life, even in its contradictions, could still be gentle. He lowered his head. Without her, my world would have been a black and white film no one wanted to watch. When he stepped down, the audience stayed silent, honoring the fragile beauty of his confession. Then Al Pacino rose. He gripped the podium like an anchor, his eyes half closed as though he could see her there among the candles. I met Diane when we were both lost, he began, his voice a gravel whisper. On The Godfather. I was Michael Corleone. She was Kay Adams. On screen, we were lovers in the dark. Off screen, we tried to be the same. But life isn't a movie. He smiled faintly. She loved me with all her faith. I wasn't ready for that. She wanted something real, marriage, a home, maybe a little peace. And I was running from everything, even myself. A hush fell deeper. One day she left me a note, he continued. It said, if you can't stay, I'll still love you, but I'll go. And she did. That smile, the one everyone remembers, became the gentlest scar of my life. Pacino's breathing grew uneven. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. During my worst years, when my career was falling apart, she sent me this. A small check and a line written in her looping hand. Don't fall, Al. You're still the man I believe in. He held the envelope up, voice breaking. I kept it for 40 years. A tear slid down his cheek. She didn't save me with words. She saved me by believing I was worth saving. He looked toward the casket, his lips trembling. If heaven exists, I hope she's still wearing that wide-brimmed hat, waiting for me, saying, Al, you're late. He stepped back, the crowd motionless except for the quiet sound of someone crying in the far row. Finally, Keanu Reeves approached, younger than the others. He carried a quiet stillness, the kind that made the entire room breathe differently. I met Diane on the set of Something's Gotta Give, he said, his voice low but steady. I was just a kid, really a confused young man trying to find his footing. She walked onto the set, and it was like sunlight walked with her. He smiled softly at the memory. She'd bring coffee for everyone, from the lighting guy to the extras. She'd ask, You doing okay today, Keanu? Even when she was the biggest star in the room. He looked down for a moment, collecting himself. There was no romance between us. What we shared was something quieter, respect, warmth, a sense that she saw the good in people long before they saw it themselves. Keanu's eyes glistened. She wrote me cards, real, handwritten notes. After my father passed, after my sister, just little reminders that kindness still existed. I never called her mom, but she was the closest thing I ever had to one. He paused, then smiled through tears. She once told me, "You don't have to pretend to be strong, Keanu. Just be real." That was Diane, real in a world built on illusion. When he finished, the three men sat again. Woody with his eyes lowered, Pacino holding the letter in his palm, Keanu staring at the candle flames like they might spell her name. The audience knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not gossip, not eulogy, but a symphony of memory from three souls who had loved the same woman in three very different ways. Woody had loved her mind. Pacino had loved her faith. Keanu had loved her heart. Each carried a different piece of her, and together, they formed the outline of Diane Keaton herself. Outside, the afternoon sun began to fade. Inside, the candles burned lower, throwing soft gold across the white flowers. And though the tributes were ending, Diane's story was far from over. Because the next chapter, her years away from romance, her decision to become a mother, and the quiet world she built for herself, would reveal a woman not defined by fame, but by the love she gave freely until her very last day. After the applause faded and the candles burned low, the memories continued, not in speeches now, but in the quiet hearts of those who had loved her. For many, Diane Keaton's story had always been told through the men who adored her. Woody, Al, Jack, Keanu. But the truth was that her most powerful chapter began the moment she walked away from all of them. In the 1990s, when Hollywood still whispered about age like it was a curse, Diane made a choice that few could understand. She decided she had loved enough for one lifetime. The tabloids waited for her next romance, another headline, another name. But there were none. Instead, at 50, Diane turned her gaze inward. She wanted a love that didn't need to be performed, a love that would last even after the lights went out. That love found her in the form of motherhood. In 1998, she adopted a baby girl and named her Dexter. 3 years later, a boy, Duke, no husband, no wedding, no fanfare. Just a woman who had spent decades being everyone's muse, finally becoming someone's mother. Her friends called it a brave act. Diane simply called it life, finally making sense. Her once lonely home in Brentwood, filled with the sounds of laughter, the clutter of toys, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. Gone were the days of red carpets and endless fittings. In their place were school lunches, bedtime stories, and the warm chaos of family. She was a mother in every sense. Dexter would later say, "She didn't care if her makeup was perfect or if a camera was near. She cared if you were okay, if you'd eaten, if you'd smiled today." Diane found herself transformed. She used to chase love like it was a role she hadn't yet perfected. Now, love was a small pair of hands tugging at her sleeve, a sleepy voice whispering, "Mom, stay a little longer." She still kept her eccentricities, the hats, the vests, the early morning walks. but she no longer hid behind them. Each hat, each suit, each quiet morning coffee by the window became part of her peace, not her armor. Her diary from those years, later published in fragments, revealed a woman both tender and self-aware. "I've spent my whole life trying to be seen," she wrote, "and motherhood made me realize I already was." Diane did everything herself. She refused nannies, drove her children to school, attended every play and recital, often in oversized sunglasses and her trademark turtleneck. Neighbors would wave as she walked the family dogs each evening, a paper cup of coffee in hand. To them, she wasn't an Oscar-winning actress. She was just Diane, the kind woman next door with the unforgettable laugh. In interviews, she spoke about her children more than her films. "They don't care who I am on screen," she once said, laughing. "And that's the best thing about them. They make me real." The woman who had once been called Hollywood's most unpredictable romantic had become its most quietly devoted mother. And through that transformation, she found what fame and love affairs never gave her: serenity. Her home reflected that serenity: white walls, sunlight filtering through glass windows, framed black and white photographs, not of premieres or awards, but of Dexter painting, of Duke asleep with a book in his hands. She said she wanted to fill her house with ordinary beauty, the kind you don't have to chase. As the years passed, Diane continued to act, to direct, to write, but at her own pace. She turned down projects that didn't speak to her heart, preferring the quiet rhythm of family life. She didn't disappear," a friend once said. "She just decided to live." Every morning, she brewed her coffee, sat by the same window, and watched the light fall across the photographs she'd taken herself. She would hum softly, jazz, always jazz, and smile as the sun moved slowly across the floor. For someone who had once feared loneliness, she discovered that solitude could be gentle when filled with love. When asked, near the end of her life, what made her happiest, Diane smiled that familiar crooked smile. "My kids," she said simply. "They're the best thing I've ever done." And perhaps, for a woman who had lived through grand loves and quiet heartbreaks, who had faced the applause and the silence that follows, that was the most honest answer of all. But Diane's story didn't end in her living room or in her children's laughter. Beyond the comfort of her home lay another world she quietly mastered, one of design, creativity, and wealth built not from vanity, but vision. Because while she lived like an artist, she also thought like an architect, and what she built would outlive her. By the time Diane Keaton entered her 70s, Hollywood had long learned that she could not be defined by roles alone. She had become something larger, a quiet architect of her own world. While others collected trophies, Diane collected spaces, houses, light, and the feeling of home. Those were her true art forms. It began in the 1980s, at the height of her fame. After years spent on sound stages, pretending to live in other people's stories, she decided to build one of her own. She bought an aging Spanish-style villa on the edge of Los Angeles. Its paint cracked, tiles faded, windows clouded with dust, and began restoring it piece by piece. Friends thought it was just another project. But Diane treated that house the way she treated every role, with obsession, intuition, and love. She spent hours choosing tiles, adjusting light angles, studying the texture of old wood. She'd run her hands over walls and say, "I can feel its history here." When the house was finished, it looked like something from a dream, modern yet timeless, full of breath and memory. Then she sold it, not because she had to, but because she wanted to begin again. Each home after that became a chapter of her life. Tudor, Spanish Revival, modernist glass. She'd move in, rebuild, and move on, as if each home was a film and she was both its director and its muse. Design is like storytelling, she once said. You don't just decorate, you listen. Over the next 4 decades, Diane quietly built an empire of creativity. She wasn't chasing wealth, she was shaping it with her hands. By the time she reached 75, her fortune was estimated at nearly $100 million, not from extravagance, but from the art of reinvention. She never flaunted it. Her success was painted in subtle colors: whitewashed walls, brass handles, the smell of cedar after rain. In 2012, she published a photo book titled House. It wasn't a vanity project. It was her love letter to architecture, pages filled with her own photographs, reflections, and diary notes about the homes she had transformed. Each page was quiet, contemplative, just like her. It became a bestseller among artists and architects alike. She built beauty like other people build careers. One critic wrote, "She didn't need applause, she needed sunlight." Her last home, the one she called her dream house, sat in Brentwood, bright white, flooded with morning light, surrounded by olive trees and ivy. Every window was wide enough to let the sky in. Every chair faced the garden, where she would read with her dogs beside her feet. That home became her sanctuary in her final years. It was where she would laugh with Dexter and Duke over dinner, where she'd edit photos late into the night, and where she would sometimes pause, coffee in hand, watching light travel across the walls as though it were alive. She once said, "I don't just act in movies, I act in the houses I live in." It sounded whimsical, but it was true. Each home held a performance of her spirit, the performance of living gracefully. Before she passed, Diane arranged everything with the precision of a director setting her final scene. No lawyers battling, no endless paperwork, just order. Her estate plan was written years in advance. The Brentwood home would belong to Dexter. The daughter, she said, was the calm I never found. To Duke, she left her investment portfolio, royalties, and several smaller properties. To both, she left her journals, handwritten, bound in soft leather, tied with silk ribbons. Inside were her thoughts on life, love, art, and the quiet importance of kindness. When asked once if she worried about how people would remember her, Diane laughed. "I don't want to leave money as my legacy," she said. "I want to leave a sense of security, a feeling that it's okay to live your life your way." And she did. Even her wealth felt intimate, built from imagination, discipline, and grace. Her children often said her success wasn't loud, but steady. Like the ticking of a clock you only notice when it stops. When friends visited near the end, they said her house felt alive, not like a monument, but like a memory still breathing. It smelled of coffee, paint, and jasmine. Photographs of her life hung quietly on the walls. Diane and Al laughing on set. Diane walking with Woody through Central Park. Diane holding Dexter and Duke in the backyard. The home was her autobiography, written in color and light. And in that sanctuary, surrounded by everything she had loved and built, Diane Keaton spent her final months. The woman who once brought warmth to millions was now keeping that warmth close, in the rooms she had designed, in the hearts she had touched, in the quiet golden hours that had become her world. But time, even in the most beautiful house, cannot be stopped. And the day would come when Los Angeles woke to the news that the woman who taught the world to live on her own terms had finally gone home. In the end, Diane Keaton left this world as she had lived in it, quietly, gracefully, without spectacle. On October 11th, 2025, the news broke across Hollywood like a slow, sorrowful wave. Diane Keaton has passed away at the age of 79. It was one of those headlines that made time pause. For a moment, the city of make-believe felt unbearably real. She died peacefully at her home in Brentwood, surrounded by Dexter, Duke, and a handful of close friends. Outside, the California sky was its usual blue, the garden filled with golden light, the way she always liked it. The cause was simple, yet cruel. Bacterial pneumonia, a quiet illness that had crept up unnoticed. For weeks, she had grown frailer, her steps slower, her smile thinner, yet she told no one. "Don't worry, darling." She told a friend over the phone just days before her passing. "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired." That was her, protecting everyone else from the truth, keeping her pain private, as if dignity were the final gift she could give. Her children later revealed that even in her final days, she listened to her favorite jazz records, Chet Baker, Billie Holiday, the soft hum of time itself. She'd sip tea, watch the light shift through her windows, and smile at the dog sleeping by her feet. She wasn't afraid. She had said it before. "Death doesn't scare me. Not living honestly does." When the news spread, tributes poured in from every corner of the world. Woody Allen called her the heartbeat of his best work. Al Pacino said, "She taught me how to feel," Keanu Reeves wrote. She reminded us that kindness can be revolutionary. Jack Nicholson, whose words at her funeral would later be replayed millions of times, simply said through tears, "I loved her, and I always will." The world grieved not just a movie star, but a symbol of independence, authenticity, and grace. For half a century, Diane had defined what it meant to be real in an industry built on illusion. From Annie Hall to The Godfather, from Reds to Something's Gotta Give, she carried within her that rare alchemy of humor and heartbreak, chaos and calm. She once said, "I never tried to be mysterious. I just tried to be myself," and I think that confused people. Maybe that's why audiences loved her. She didn't try to belong to the world. She invited the world to belong to her. In the days after her death, her home became a shrine of sorts. Friends came quietly, leaving flowers at her gate. Neighbors said the house seemed to glow at dusk, as if the light itself refused to leave. Inside, Dexter and Duke sorted through her things, letters, Polaroids, old scripts filled with her scribbles. They found a small envelope sealed with wax, labeled simply, "For my kids." Inside were a few handwritten lines. "If you're reading this, I've gone home. Don't be sad. Keep laughing. Love is not about staying forever. It's about shining while you can." Her children framed the note and placed it by the window where she used to sit. The sunlight hit it every morning, the ink glowing softly in the golden air. In that quiet Brentwood house, the woman who had spent her life chasing light had finally become it. Hollywood moved on, as it always does, but her presence lingered in every reflection, every hat worn at a tilt, every woman who dared to be both fragile and fierce. You could still see her spirit in the new generation of actresses who spoke her name with reverence. You could still hear her laugh echoing in old interviews, disarming and full of life. Even now, when It Had to Be You plays on the radio, someone somewhere still closes their eyes and thinks of her, the woman who made simplicity extraordinary. In one of her final interviews, Diane was asked what she wanted people to remember. She smiled thoughtfully and said, I hope they remember that I tried to live beautifully, not perfectly, just beautifully. And maybe that is her greatest legacy, that beauty was never about perfection, but about honesty. Diane Keaton taught the world that growing older isn't a tragedy. It's an art. That solitude isn't emptiness, it's freedom. And that love, even unspoken, can last forever. As the credits of her life quietly rolled, there was no applause, only the whisper of wind through the olive trees outside her window. Somewhere, in that soft California light, you could almost see her, wide-brimmed hat, camera in hand, eyes full of wonder, walking into the distance with that same unshakable grace. A woman who never needed permission to be herself, and who, even now, still feels present, like a memory that refuses to fade.